Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Reintegrate public webinar. I am your host, Anastasis Yanusakis from E3M. We are delighted to have Tabaré A Currás with us today, who will talk about a new framework launched about just transitions. I will leave the details to Tabaré, but maybe a few words on him. Tabaré is an international climate and energy expert with over 15 years of experience in policy, economics, and governance. He has led global efforts to support national and subnational actors in advancing just science-based climate action. And he has advised United Nations agencies, international organizations, and taken part in the global climate negotiations. He's currently collaborating with the International Just Transition Observatory, about which we will hear in today's presentation, and holds degrees in environmental engineering and sustainable development with specialized training in climate finance and renewable energy. Tabaré, we are very happy to have you. The floor is yours. You can start your presentation.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Can you tell me if it's already?
Yes, it's in presentation mode and we can see it.
Perfect. So, okay, well, thank you very much, Anastasis, and thank you to everyone for inviting me to this session. I'm very honored. I've been reading about the Reintegrate project, and I would like to congratulate you. I think it's a very interesting project. I think it covers a very good space, a good opportunity to share knowledge, particularly in the context of energy transitions. I am a proponent that transition must be not only feasible, but they need to be fair, they need to be realistic, they need to be grounded and sustained in the needs of the communities and the territories, especially in the majority of the world. And that's why today I want to talk about this concept of just transition, which, by the way, in the context of energy modeling community, I think is something that we can still pursue further. Today I'm speaking as a collaborator of the Observatory of Just Energy Transition, which is an initiative by the IE University in Spain and the IGDP Institute for Global Decarbonization in Beijing. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be saying are more my personal views. I wanted to attract your attention to the concept of just transition. And that's why I am planning to, if you allow me, to pursue a conversation rather than a presentation with you all. So this is the way I would like to start with. I think it's quite relevant for us to have a setting scene of what a just transition is, what does it means, and therefore I would like to introduce you towards the concept via the history of how just transitions have been evolving, how the concept of just transition has been evolving over time. From that perspective, I would like to tell you what are the gaps that I am seeing from the lenses of the energy modeling community, although you can also shift the coin and put it as the opportunities for example, social scientists to also support endeavors in energy modeling, in fairer energy modeling. I would like at the end to say a couple of words of a couple of ideas of how perhaps modeling community can embrace this concept better, to do smarter observations, to conduct a fairer assessment, and to have more impact in the policy advice that they provide. And I would also like to say, and it's a little bit of history, I'm not myself an energy modeler. I was trained as such. And therefore, it's not really my intention to give a lecture on this. It is really a moment to present the views of what I think a just transition look like, and maybe discuss with you what opportunities we have in our community, in the community of the energy modeling. So if we are happy with this approach, Anastasis, let me jump to my first slide. I made this quick search on Google Analytics just to trace when the concept of just transition became quite popular. It's quite interesting because it is evident that from 2015, more or less, when the Paris Agreement was established, this is the moment in which the concept started. But the actual discourse about the just transition comes from way behind in time. The origins of the just transition go back to the 70s. It was first coined by the unions, by the labor unions that wanted to protect the workers, especially in the nuclear arm industry. Back in those days, you may recall that the non-proliferation agreements were signed and the disarmament was taking place. So the idea of just transition emerged from that, from the protection of the workers working in the arm industry. Over a long time, the concept did not really evolve from that unionist perspective, and it was more or less during the Cancun days in 2010 and further during the Paris Agreement, when the concept was really embraced, adopted, particularly for the climate community. This on the idea that the transition towards a lower economy demanded, well, the inclusion of workers and the rights of them to have new opportunities. It is after the Paris Agreement, when in the Paris Agreement, for the first time, the just transition is embedded, when the real thing starts. After the Paris Agreement, you can see the different COPs, the different highlights that took place in this concept in 2018 in the Silesia Declaration during the Katowice conference. The idea of just transition evolved from climate versus workers into a renewal of the community, the fossil fuel endowed communities. And from then on, the whole concept started migrating into more of the how to ensure the migration of economic activity and of the peoples that were more affected by the transition toward lower economy. Nowadays, the just transition concept has been particularly covered, I would say, by the finance community. Just transition has become something that is quite relevant as an objective to design financial instruments, financial tools. And I think this is pretty much the situation with relationship to just transition. So from that perspective, we can gather three things. The first one is that the just transition concept is not really new. Nonetheless, it has been quite adopted by the climate community. And it has been adopted, secondly, by that discourse connected to the rights of the workers and the communities endowed with the fossil fuels, which brings us to the third point. The just transition nowadays as a concept is really focused into the fossil energy and the possibilities that moving towards that fossil energy may bring to the low carbon economy. But the reality is that this is a concept that goes beyond this conversation. And today there's no real framework, there's no real consensus of what a just transition is, should look like, or should be assessed. We have various definitions. I usually mock with my friends. The just transition is the new sustainability. In every sentence you will read out there in the news or in the climate discourses and negotiations, somebody will put just transition as a core, as we are using sustainability back in the 20s or 2000s. So it has become a concept that means a lot, but it doesn't have a proper understanding by everyone. And this has derived into misleading social considerations, because often the way we use just transition is overlooking equity, inclusion, or real social outcomes. So having said that, I don't want to get us sidelined from the conversation of a new definition, and therefore I would like to give you my own interpretation. And for that, I want to quote Kulu Madiba, better known as grandfather Nelson Mandela, who once he said, as long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in the world, and no one of us can truly rest. And I think this is a very powerful quote, because to some extent it talks about something that is quite relevant in the context of justice, and that's the increment of the well-being, increasing the capacities for the people to be safe, to be healthy, to be fulfilled. So to me, when we talk about just transition, we should talk about that part, the increasing of well-being in the world. On the other hand, transition is, we're talking about a process, we're talking about a step by step. And as we know, a goal without a plan is simply a wish. And therefore, just transition needs to be well planned, needs to be holistically in order for it to be driving us towards real well-being. For that reason, when I define just transition, I think a better point of departure is to discuss about just and safe transitions. The just and safe transitions, the real that lead us to protection of life, the promotion of communities in thriving manners, and also allows to respect the planetary boundaries. Now, you may be seeing this definition a bit complex, but I made it complex intentionally, because the just transition discourse must take us to a multidimensional dimension and be understood as a mission-driven process, a process that takes us away from sectorial silos and moves away from a purely technical conversation into something that is deeply rooted in the political, in the social, in the ecological, and the institutional transformations of the new world. And more importantly, I do think that we're talking about a sustained, open process that recognizes global inequalities, that is rooted in local realities, and that invite a broader participation, or in other words, that acknowledges the past harms, that shares the burden and the benefits, and that ensures the inclusivity of that transition. So this is basically the framework that you will hear all out there about what a just transition minimum look like. A process that has a recognition of justice, distributional justice, and procedural justice. So how do we deal with that from an energy modeling community? Energy models are very important tools for us to do planning, to generate processes, whether we're talking about optimization models or integrated assessment models. Well, the fact that there's evidence based on sustained research and numbers always brings some relevance of the planning exercise. Yet we all know that the modeling exercise have their caveats, they're not perfect. And therefore, we need to understand what are those and how, for instance, they can prevent us from moving into a just transition. I'm going to give you a quick example, one of my favorites from the old times in which I was modeling things. And this probably is very well known by many of you. Every time the International Energy Agency, and please do not take this as a criticism, but as a fact, they have been undermining the projections of renewable energy. The World Energy Outlook, year after year, has been missing. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. It's actually positive because it's proven that reality is different from the conservatism. But the main thing here is not what is why this is happening, but what are the impacts. So when we are modeling things based on old-fashioned cost and policy assumptions, or when we are including outdated assumptions, or when we are capping or constraining our models to perform in the business as usual, even if we call it new policies and scenarios, well, what we are actually doing is just repeating the same thing once and again and portraying the current problems of today's reality into the future. So I think this is just my view on example. There are probably many of them. And that's why it is quite relevant that from a modeling perspective, I believe we embrace somehow recognition of distribution and procedural justice. It's very important that we understand that institutional change and social progress happens, and we need to find ways to model that. We also need to start playing with disaggregated information whenever available that captures cultural, social, and geographical differences. And very importantly, from a procedural point of view, we need to create models that are more open, that can be subject to scrutiny, and that can be understood for wider communities. I am reaching the end of this small talk, and I want to tell you a couple of more things. I found this a very interesting article that is basically illustrating some of the problems that I've mentioned. This article, for instance, tell us or show us from an investigation of 70-something publications in the field of modeling and just transitions, the number of authors from higher income economies that are producing very important research connected to case studies of high income countries. And that basically covers a large majority of the research that is taken, at least from the perspective of just transition. And we can also see in there that even little of the research that is case studying non-high income countries might come also from high income affiliated institutions that often might keep portraying the premises, the realities of their environment into what we see, what we don't see in other places. It's quite interesting, this article. It's not my intention to go into the details. This same article gives us another very interesting approach. It tells how energy modeling community has been covering, at least from the discourse perspective, different important elements that are the core of the just transition, like, for instance, job creation, energy access, health and disability, energy poverty. And what we see is that in this research, and it is not to take this as an absolute, but as an illustration of the opportunities of how these concepts embedded into the fairness and equity can be thought or rethought to be continued in the energy modeling exercises. So last and not least, a couple of views of how this can help us moving forward. Again, please do not take this as a criticism. It's rather me sharing my views to explain how other new models or how energy modeling can possibly take place in the near future. So I think an important element is that energy modeling, regardless of how they take place, they reflect better the reality. So they integrate plural knowledge systems, the knowledge of the local communities where these studies are being case studied, that assumptions are assessed under the lenses of behavioral, political, and social sciences, and they are also reviewed under perspectives of identity, gender, and sense of place. I think it's also quite relevant that model start playing the way with how they portray impacts differently with disaggregated data that focus more on the territorial local impacts whenever possible, and understand the real benefits and trade-offs in terms of jobs, pollution, land use change, health, etc., etc., etc. Finally, from a procedural perspective, and I am sure a proof of that this is possible, it is this project, ensure open modeling. Models that are co-developed, that are co-validated, that are communicated on the larger audiences in order to foster dialogue and to support premises that reflect the collective community, territorial, and local perspective. So this is basically what I wanted to talk very briefly to you today. Let me say a word of the International Just Transition Observatory. As I said before, this is an initiative of the IE University and the Institute for Global Decarbonization based in Beijing. And the whole idea of the institute is basically to give a new meaning of what is just transition from this local perspective. So we want to build new tools that allow the just transition to be understood further, particularly from the finance sector, delivering new ways of measuring just transition with indicators that reflect this multidimensionality, this complexity, and that really can produce data-informed decisions that are sustained by the realities on the ground. So there's a couple of activities that we are doing. not to get into details of this because of time's sake, but I leave you the details of the Just Transition Observatory. If you want to know more about what we're doing, please feel free to reach us. And of course, I also leave you my details. So I hope this very short presentation allows to have a smaller conversation, and hopefully this is also useful for the sake of the project. That's it. Thank you very much, Anastasis. Back to you.
Thank you, Tabaré. Thank you also for trying to keep it short, whereas as a topic, it is very broad indeed. I am pleased to hear that your ideas align very well with the whole concept of the Reintegrate project in many levels and in many areas. I will now open the floor for questions. I might actually start with one. I understand that the observatory is very newly launched, and you did show us a slide with your main focus areas. But I was wondering about the regional scope of the effort. How are you planning to, do you have any areas in the globe that you want to focus more? And whether you will be looking at countries individually or also at how the whole global climate policy is evolving and the just transition aspects in this scope, like the global scope?
Yeah, that's a very good one. So at the moment, the observatory is kind of finding a little bit of the way. It's really newly launched. We launched a few months back. And so I will tell you very quickly, the very first intention is that somehow we can land an indicator systems that can track a little bit more homogeneously these processes in different countries, and particularly from a majority of the world perspective. So indeed, we are focusing on countries that are in emerging or development economic states. So that's one thing, that's one of the intentions. But overall, what we want to create is a common language for us to measure this. Now, it is very important because the just transition perspective is really rooted on the territory, on the local aspect. So it becomes a little bit more complicated, and that's why we are also, as part of the work, doing some case studies both at sectoral level, so not only at regional level, but also at sectoral level. And there are a couple of options that we are focusing, or that we are thinking that will be the main drivers. Of course, energy will be the energy sector, but also the material sector, that's an important one, and fundamentally the agricultural sector. So this is basically what we are doing. And very, very importantly, and I think this is the novelty of the observatory, there's a concrete aspect on mobilization on financial means. So at the moment, we think that there's not a true understanding because of the lack of common sense, consensus on what a just transition is. There's not a good way to track financial flows. So a part of this work of systems, indicator systems, what we're aiming for is to create a common kind of check that allows us to really track and see if the mobilization of funding from the north to the south is really sustaining the transition to with justice. And not only from north to south, but also intra developing and emerging economies perspective. So the idea is that we do have a system that can value this better. So in summary to your question, yes, we're focusing on a global perspective from these system indicators, but the intention is that we are going to put in practice this at the local and sectorial level.
Thank you. Yes, this is very interesting.
Sorry, can I use my host privileges since I have too many buttons here? Thank you so much, Tabaré, for the presentation, and I really appreciate your comments now, because justice in raising, mobilizing climate finance from north to south, but also from private sector. And just transitions has a separate sort of negotiations track now under, well, in preparation for COP. So if you've been following what's happened in Bonn, SAPSTA, that is a big issue. So if you think of a modeling community and then the role of modeling community in terms of science policy interface, how to actually put it in practice, because justice is on the agenda, but it's there, people talk about it, but how to do it? Do you have any practical advice?
Yes. Well, a practical advice, I think it's quite relevant to connect with that other non-modeling communities as part of the energy modeling design process. And that's why my emphasis is, probably I would not have the credentials to speak beyond my tacit knowledge on what justice is. And probably there are varying definitions of what justice is in different places. And that's why it's so important that we bring other voices in that process, and especially social scientists and political scientists that can help us give us a meaning in the assumptions that we are embedding mathematically within our models. I mean, it's not always very easy to take an abstract concept and make it mathematically, especially when we are talking about, for instance, I would say optimization processes. Yet, I think there's always an opportunity in subsequent validation exercise when our assumptions are offered to the other perspectives to be scrutinized. And that might give us already hints on how we can start modeling justice in financial flows, for instance.
This is very interesting indeed. Do we have any more questions from the audience? I see Fitsum raising a hand. Go ahead, Fitsum. Maybe also introduce yourselves very quickly, Tabaré, so that he gets to know you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks indeed, Tabaré, for the presentation. I'm Fitsum from the Reintegrate project, and it's actually a follow-up from Marina, because, for instance, in this huge disparity between the global south and the north, and even within the global south, electrification status between urban and rural areas, there is this, which I believe is mono solution from energy modelers, say for instance, which we mainly focus on cost optimality, rapid or ambitious targets on expanding electrification accesses, etc. So how we can, let's say, incorporate this the very basic energy modeling practice with let's say to reflect justice, or with let's say the principles of justice in energy transitions, especially in electrifications, like in the global south, or for instance, as a quick example from Ethiopia, even if the national electrification rate by now is about more than 55%, but still the electrification status in the rural is really very low as compared to this national number even. So we mainly, for instance, as energy modeler, as I said, I'm mainly interested in and of course capable in doing this cost optimal electrification. That's all. So how can I, for instance, include the principles of just energy transition, like equity, or I don't know, just it's a little bit beyond this very fundamental modeling practice, as I see it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Let me just, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to tell you how exactly you can do that. Again, just as I respond to Marina, I will give you a couple of insights. I'm glad you mentioned IRENA. I think IRENA has been unpurposely pursuing exercise that have been open to wider communities. I believe they have done workshops in order to also disclose what are the assumptions, how are the technique modeling. And that has been a very interesting exercise. There's a book that I might send you later, if I will send it to Anastasis, that I recently stumbled upon, in which those I would say multidisciplinary exercises of energy modeling, in other words, call it workshops, have been developed precisely to start finding solutions how to do this best in the adequate context. So that's one thing. The other thing is that please correct me, but I think the modeling exercise is not only about the coding and the mathematics. I think the modeling exercise it has an initial and middle and post step, and I think I'm going to focus on the last one. The results of the modeling exercise I know that we have a tendency as scientists, or those are scientists, to maintain the non-prescription approach, which I find fundamental. I think this is one of the core principles of, for instance, the IPCC. But what is relevant is every time we say we're going to produce policy relevant or policy informed suggestions, we give a sense of that, and we present what are the caveats of those, and more importantly, we make sure that people understand that. And I'm going to give you a concrete example that it is a taboo in many communities: uncertainties. Everybody seems to be quite afraid of dealing with uncertainties. And because of those, many times the results of the modeling are not properly understood. I think we need to train those audiences that we are making or policy informed recommendations in the management of uncertainty. So when we present a model results and we tell them, okay, this result is based on ABC assumption, and it has ABC caveat, and therefore you have a management, you have an uncertainty on this side, then you are prepared to take what it is the best decision. And I believe that this exercise, the validation of the results from that perspective, from the output perspective, are not often taken into the next level, into the discourse with the politicians, with the communities, etc. So I would say that that would be another point, not only about mathematizing justice, but as a procedural point of view, the actual communication of the results have a large opportunity to increase not only transparency, credibility, robustness, and accountability, but also to foster better understanding, inclusivity, other voices being heard and respected, and therefore subsequently justice. So I think this is a common point. I basically covered 2 workshops in order to design, finally, but then the actual process of how you do this better, I think that that is probably out of my capacities, but probably one of the objectives of this project. So, Fitsum, I hope that provide some insights to your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tabaré. We might have time for a very quick question or comment before we close the session. Doesn't seem like it. You will be pleased to hear that many of your ideas are actually implemented in several different aspects and ways in the Reintegrate project. For instance, I mean, also if we abstract everything a bit and we talk about just transitions and how they are being modeled, let's say, in the Reintegrate project, we make sure that we keep track of inclusivity. We have an ethics advisor, and the way we operate always keeps, as I said, inclusivity in track and in the focus. And then, of course, also the case studies that we are looking at are all containing equity considerations and just transition considerations. So maybe keep an eye on the outcomes of what will come out of the project, and we will be keeping an eye on the observatory, and any collaboration that may come out of that is also very welcome for the future. We will be inviting you also to the future webinars, so you can be informed on what is going on. Yes, I will thank you once more at this point, and close the session. And if you have any concluding remarks, feel free. Otherwise, we can say goodbye now.
Thank you. I just would like to extend my gratitude again to all the members of the consortia, and particularly the modeling energy community in the African region. Very important what you're doing, and I will really keep an eye on this exercise. I think what I have read is really interesting. What you have explained to me, Anastasia, is even more motivating. So please keep an eye on the idea of embedding justice, embedding well-being, and more importantly, being open for this to be really understood by the largest audiences. So thanks again. I hope this was useful, and please keep an eye on the Just Transition Observatory. Many interesting things may come in the future in your field of expertise as well.
We definitely will. Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks Tabaré. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.